The moment Frank Wilson stepped into the community center, the whispers began. "Look at the old-timer," someone sniggered. At 75, the retired Marine was used to being underestimated. Little did these young troublemakers know what 40 years of combat training had forged. Frank adjusted the worn veteran's cap on his silver hair and straightened his posture, a lifetime habit from his military days. His eyes methodically scanned the community center. Exits, open spaces, potential obstacles. Even after decades of civilian life, some habits never faded. "You must be Frances Wilson," said the receptionist, glancing up from her computer. "The new volunteer for Veterans Connect?" "Just Frank," he corrected automatically. "Reporting for duty." The receptionist's lips pursed slightly. "Well, just Frank. Here's your schedule and a map of the facility. Our coordinator, Margaret, will show you around." She gestured toward a woman with salt and pepper hair, approaching with a warm smile. "Welcome to Lakeside," Margaret said with genuine enthusiasm. "Let me give you the tour." As Margaret led him through the bustling community center, Frank took mental notes. Emergency exits, security cameras, blind spots. The tour ended at the Veterans Lounge, where several men his age sat playing cards. "I need to check on the youth program," Margaret said. "Will you be okay finding the cafeteria at noon for the veterans' lunch?" Frank nodded, and Margaret disappeared down the corridor. The lounge was emptying as the other veterans headed for various activities. Frank opened his locker to store his jacket, testing the lock twice. Another old habit. A shadow fell across him. "That's not your locker, old-timer." Frank turned to face three young men. Their leader, a muscular fellow with a snake tattoo crawling up his neck, had the hard eyes of someone accustomed to intimidation. His greasy hair was slicked back, and his clothes reeked of cigarettes. "Number 24, Frank said calmly, pointing to the small plaque, a sign by the office. "That's been Viper's personal stash spot for months," said one of the other men, a wiry individual with nervous energy. "Administration screwed up." Frank recognized the moment for what it was. A test, a claiming of territory. His son's words echoed in memory. "Dad, not everyone's out to get you. Choose your battles." "I'll request a different one," Frank said, closing the locker and stepping away. Viper's hand shot out, shoving Frank hard against the metal. "That's right, Grandpa. And while you're at it, watch yourself around here. Accidents happen to people who forget their place." A familiar heat bloomed in Frank's chest, but decades of discipline kicked in. "Breathe. Center yourself." "Got it?" Frank replied, voice deliberately steady. Viper seemed disappointed by the lack of reaction. He knocked Frank's folder from his hands before sauntering away with his friends, their laughter echoing down the corridor. That evening in his small apartment, still smelling of fresh paint after just 3 weeks of residence, Frank wrapped his hands with familiar precision before attacking the heavy bag hanging in the corner. His knuckles, gnarled from arthritis yet still formidable, drove into the bag with practiced accuracy. "Rough first day." The voice came from the doorway, where his son Michael stood holding a grocery bag, concern etched on his face. Frank threw a 3-punch combination that sent the bag swinging. The usual. Michael Wilson watched his father with knowing eyes. At 50, Michael had never served himself, creating a silent divide between them that neither fully acknowledged. "Want to talk about it?" Michael asked, setting the groceries on the counter. "Not particularly." Another combination, this time ending with an elbow strike that would have incapacitated a real opponent. "Dad." His son's voice took on that tone, not speaking as a son, but as a family's voice of reason since Frank's wife had passed 5 years ago. Frank caught the bag, stealing it. Some thugs at the community center, acting like they owned the place. Typical stuff. I didn't engage. But they made a comment about respect for elders that made me question their community service motives. Frank unwrapped his hands. "They want to make sure I understand my place." Michael's face tightened. "We just moved you here to be closer to us. Please don't start trouble." "When have I ever started trouble?" Frank asked, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. "Baton Rouge, 2012. That mugger ended up with 3 broken ribs. He pulled a knife on a woman. And Phoenix, 2017. Those 2 men harassing the convenience store clerk. They were robbing the place, Michael. His son sighed. I just want you to have a peaceful retirement. Make some friends your own age. See your grandkids more. Frank offered a small smile. I know, son. After dinner, Frank searched online for information about the community center. Public records revealed the community service program was a court-mandated alternative for first-time offenders. Further digging showed Viper, real name Vincent Reynolds, had a history of intimidating elderly patrons. Several had stopped attending programs altogether. Another patron, Walter Banks, 82, had been hospitalized last year after what was officially recorded as a fall on the community center steps. Frank closed his laptop. Decision made. The next day passed in a blur of veterans' activities and sideways glances. Word had spread about Viper's confrontation with the new old guy by the afternoon chess tournament. Even Margaret had heard something. Frank, I need to speak with you, she whispered as he was setting up the board. I've heard Vincent Reynolds approached you yesterday. Vincent? You mean the kid with the snake tattoo? Yes. He and his friends are in our rehabilitation program. They're completing community service hours. Margaret looked troubled. They've had issues with some of our senior members before. Issues? Frank repeated, keeping his voice neutral. Nothing we could prove definitively, she said carefully. But several members stopped attending after interactions with them. Walter Banks claimed they pushed him down the stairs, but there were no witnesses. And they're still allowed here? Margaret sighed. Their court orders mandate their participation. The center needs the county funding that comes with the program. As Frank left the chess tournament, he found a note taped to his locker. Veterans Parking Lot. 4 p.m. Learn some respect. You shouldn't go, said George, a Vietnam vet who befriended Frank during the chess game. Those punks are looking to make an example of someone. I heard what happened to Walter, Frank replied. Someone needs to stand up to them. Not worth getting hurt over, George countered. You're, 75? Those kids are in their 20s. Frank smiled slightly. I appreciate the concern, but I need to handle this. You a boxer back in the day or something? George studied his face. Something like that, Frank replied. As 4 o'clock approached, a small crowd had gathered in the parking lot. Mostly Viper's friends, but also curious onlookers drawn by rumors of confrontation. Frank spotted Margaret watching anxiously from the community center entrance, phone in hand. Viper and his 2 companions stood in the center of the informal ring, looking pleased with themselves. Didn't think you'd show, old man, Viper called as Frank approached. Frank set down his small duffel bag carefully. You want to talk? Talk. Viper laughed, his snake tattoo seeming to ride with the movement. Actually, we thought we'd educate you on respecting the natural order around here. The wiry companion, who Frank had learned was called Rat, cracked his knuckles theatrically. Lesson 1. Old dogs better remember their place. Frank took a measured breath, scanning the crowd. Margaret still at the entrance, several veterans, including George, watching with concern. No security in sight, just as they planned. I've tried being reasonable, Frank said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've asked to be left alone. This is your last chance to walk away. The crowd murmured at the unexpected declaration. Viper's face darkened. Are you threatening me, Grandpa? I'm offering you an option. The 3rd member of Viper's crew, a heavy-set young man with shaved head, stepped forward. Enough talk. He lunged with a wild haymaker that Frank sidestepped with minimal effort. The man stumbled, thrown off balance by the misconnection, and turned with an angry growl. Lucky dodge, old-timer. Frank remained perfectly still, hands relaxed at his sides, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. When the man attacked again with a flurry of punches, Frank deflected each one with subtle movements, never striking back, just redirecting the force away. The crowd grew quiet as the one-sided assault continued. The attacker, increasingly frustrated, launched a powerful kick aimed at Frank's midsection. In one fluid motion that belied his age, Frank caught his leg, twisted, and sent him sprawling to the ground. "Stay down," Frank advised calmly. The man scrambled up, face flushed with humiliation. Rat joined the fray, both men circling Frank now. They attacked simultaneously from different angles. Frank moved with the practiced efficiency of decades, using their momentum against them, sending Rat crashing into his companion. Still, Frank hadn't thrown a single punch. "Enough!" Viper barked, stepping forward. "So, you know a few old man tricks. Let's see how you handle a real fighter." He pulled off his jacket, revealing heavily tattooed arms corded with prison yard muscle. "Last chance," Frank warned. Viper smirked and launched a rushing attack. But where others had fallen, Frank pivoted, using Viper's full momentum to flip him completely over. He landed hard on his back, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs. The crowd gasped. Viper rose, fury in his eyes, all pretense gone. He attacked with real intent now, using street fighting tactics honed in juvenile detention. Frank met each attempt with precise counters, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of thousands of hours of training. When Viper overextended on a punch, Frank finally struck back, a perfectly placed palm strike to the sternum that sent him staggering backward, followed by a leg sweep that took his feet out from under him. He hit the ground hard, Frank standing over him in a ready stance. "How?" Viper wheezed, struggling to breathe. Marine Corps martial arts program instructor for 20 years, Frank said quietly. Hand-to-hand combat specialist in Vietnam. And after retirement, defensive tactics instructor for law enforcement agencies across 3 states. The crowd was dead silent now. "At my last residence," Frank continued, 3 men like you decided to corner me in the parking garage. One pulled a knife. His voice remained steady. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital. I spent 2 months dealing with police investigations and self-defense claims. Frank stepped back, allowing Viper room to stand. "I don't want to fight. I never do, but I will protect myself." He looked around at the gathered onlookers. "That goes for anyone who needs protection. This stops now. The intimidation, the threats, all of it. You think this changes anything?" Viper snarled, rubbing his chest where the palm strike had landed. "I think the video evidence of you orchestrating an assault might," came Margaret's voice as she stepped forward, phone in hand. "I've been recording since you invited Mr. Wilson to this meeting. I'm sure your probation officer will find it quite educational." Viper's face drained of color. "Everyone disperse," Margaret ordered, "except you 3. She pointed to Viper and his companions. "And you, Frank, my office now." As the crowd broke up, George approached Frank. He seemed at a loss for words. "Incredible," finished another veteran who had witnessed the confrontation. "Why didn't you tell us you were a combat instructor?" George asked. Frank shouldered his duffel bag. "It's not something I advertise." In Margaret's office, the 3 young men sat sullenly while she made phone calls to their probation officers and program supervisors. Frank waited quietly, preparing for familiar aftermath. Possible arrest, statements, maybe even another move, while we wait for the authorities to arrive. Margaret said, setting down her phone. "Perhaps you could explain yourself, Mr. Wilson. Self-defense isn't against center policy, is it?" "No, but organizing a fight club in our parking lot certainly violates several regulations," she replied, looking pointedly at Viper. "However, that wasn't what I was asking about. You have remarkable skills for someone your age." Frank hesitated. "Marines believe in staying prepared." "Prepared for what exactly?" "Life," Frank replied simply. Margaret studied him. "My father was a Marine, fought in Korea. He always said the Corps never really leaves you." Frank nodded. "Once a Marine, always a Marine." The door opened and a police officer entered, followed by a stern-looking woman in a business suit who introduced herself as a probation supervisor. And finally, to Frank's surprise, his son Michael. "Dad." Michael's expression was a mixture of concern and exasperation. "The community center called me." 2 weeks later, Frank stood in the community center's multipurpose room, facing 12 participants ranging from 18 to 80. The group included George and several other veterans, a few center staff members, and surprisingly, a subdued-looking Viper, whose probation had been modified to include Frank's self-defense class. The first rule of self-defense, Frank began, is awareness. The second is de-escalation. Fighting is always the last resort. He caught Margaret's approving nod from where she observed the class. Today we'll start with how to stand properly. Your stance is your foundation. As Frank moved among the students, correcting positions and demonstrating techniques, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: purpose, not as the quiet, intimidating veteran to be avoided, but as someone whose lifetime of skills could now protect others. Viper approached him after class, awkwardness radiating from him. "That palm strike thing you did, could you show me how that works?" Frank studied him, searching for any hint of the bully from weeks before. He found only genuine curiosity, perhaps even respect. "Sure," he said finally. "It's all about proper body alignment." As he demonstrated the technique, Frank realized that the weight he'd carried for so long, the burden of vigilance, of always being ready for the next fight, had finally begun to lift. Here in this unlikely place, he might actually find not just peace but purpose. The combat skills the Marines had taught him to survive in war could now help others stay safe in peace. And perhaps in teaching restraint rather than aggression, he might help break a cycle that had claimed too many victims already. It wasn't the ending he'd expected when he'd walked through the community center doors that first day, but as he corrected Viper's stance and saw the flicker of respect in the young man's eyes, Frank decided it might actually be better. Veterans like Frank have so much to teach us beyond war stories. Their discipline, skills, and wisdom deserve our respect, not our dismissal. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their age? Share your story of unexpected lessons from our elders in the comments below.